Hey guys, True Exodus here. We're going to be looking at triggers today for the Glock 19. We've got the Johnny custom Glock trigger. We've got the tactical trigger. We've got the Deus X Meccanica. We've got the Arsenal Democracy switch. We've got the Hive Technologies, very good trigger. And we've got the tier trigger from SSVI we're looking at today. We're going to put them through its paces, shoot 250 rounds through each one, but just make sure that they're good to go. Test them on speed, test them on accuracy, see if they help us in shooting, see if it's a purchase or one of these or multiple of these may be a purchase that's in your future. Hope you enjoy it. So the first trigger we're going to look at is the Deus X Meccanica Gunfighter trigger. It is a flat face trigger and it's just stock internals with the trigger bar, so they didn't send me an actual a full trigger assembly. They just sent me the trigger bar, which is fine, and we are just going to see what this looks like. Or 20 yards. Okay, this trigger is a little bit more squishy, a lot more pre-travel before you get to the wall, which is fine with me. Actually, it's something I prefer. But it has a clean break. It's a lot like this, but there's the slightest bit of hiccup that after I find the wall, it then breaks. So just a slight little hiccup, and it reminds me a lot about my salient trigger. The overall felt difference, there's no real poundage difference pulling back between these two that you can tell. But right now, I like this trigger a lot as well, and it obviously helps me stay accurate as well. Let's move on. So next we have Hive Technologies drop-in trigger, and again this is just the trigger bar, stock internals, and this is what the trigger looks like. Obviously it's came with a Allen key, I guess, to be able to adjust pre-travel or weight or over travel, those different types of things. But so far this trigger is surprisingly interesting. I press my finger upon the trigger and there's really no pre-travel, very minuscule pre-travel, and I find the wall. I work through the wall, there's no real hiccups or anything, and it breaks. It's a clean break, doesn't over travel back towards the end of the trigger guard, you know, back towards that area. And I come off, and a nice little short reset. Very defined wall. So let's shoot it. Okay, first thoughts and first impressions. Just trying to be accurate with the gun, and it's kind of the same stuff I had from yesterday. The trigger works really well. I have a consistent spot, which I know after I find the wall, it's very easy to find the wall, and then the trigger breaks. I like that. I like having the consistency there. And this is just really impressive, to say the least. This girl, she's petite. She's a small girl. She's about 5'4". She's about 110 pounds, and she's very predictable. She's very clean. Everything breaks very well. There's no real crazy going on from the time I find the wall to the time the gun actually discharges. So everything feels that it aids me in shooting the pistol well. Well, let's move on. Okay, so next we have the tier trigger from SSVI. And we're going to show you how this trigger works. Again, this is just a stock trigger, our trigger bar, all stock internals. So we got a wall, got some sludge or creep there, and it breaks. Reset is short-ish. Press. Creep, and then it breaks. Reset. That last one I had some anticipation on, so I'm not going to blame that on the trigger at all. I mean, imagine that everyone that I missed on could be blamed on anticipation. This trigger, I like it. I like it a lot because it's simple. You know, it's just one of those. It's one of those simple girls. She's got a simple sense of humor, and I like it. She's cute. And when I say she's cute, I mean she doesn't have a lot of crazy going on, but she does have a little bit. Okay. Now, what I mean by a little bit of crazy going on, like I said, like I showed you before, you push your finger, you find that wall. Then after the wall, there's this slight little hiccup, and then it breaks. Right. But the reset is short. And I do like the way the trigger cradles my finger, but not as much as what I like from the more flat-faced triggers. But again, that's just preference, so let's move on. Here's Johnny Custom Glocks. This guy makes custom Glock triggers, sent this to me from Instagram. Immediately I can tell you I like the trigger face and how it feels. It just feels a lot more familiar and better and smooth in my hand. I definitely like that, but it's got a lot of crazy going on. Press, find my wall, press, press, press. It's like I have to force the trigger to fire. Press it. It's like I'm already at the point where the trigger is going to break, and I've got to pull it back more in order for it to fire. So that I do not like, but I imagine that I could adjust that if I was a qualified gunsmith and I knew how to do that and keep everything safe. This was a full trigger kit assembly, and it looks like it has just a stock connector in here, but this is definitely not a stock spring right here. Let's shoot it. That last one was my fault. My sights weren't even I like this trigger a lot. It does feel like after I've pressed the trigger, the striker and the striker spring are going like, It just feels like it's not hitting as hard as that it wants to. It's a stock striker spring, but I've not had any light primer strikes or anything like that with it. She's predictable, but she's crazy. And what I mean by that is that she's the type of girl that you probably met her at a bar, right? You probably met her on spring break, and she's petite, she's tiny, she's 5'2", she's 95 pounds. So it's very, very light, very, very short break, short reset. But after I find the wall, I've got some creep, but there's not a lot of over travel. And what I mean is when it breaks, it doesn't go straight to the rear. It just goes straight to where it's supposed to. So I kind of like that a lot. But it's very nice. It obviously helps me be accurate, so I like it. Let's go on. All right, so the next trigger that we have is the tactical trigger. A lot of people have been raving about this trigger. Ooh. It feels fragile. Press, kind of find a wall, but it's not really defined. A little hiccup there, hump there, another little hump, and a short little break. Short reset, very short reset it feels like. Now, granted, this is not the trigger bar, this is the whole trigger assembly. So it definitely feels like there's a 3.5 pound connector in there, a race connector, some kind of something that's going on in there. But the trigger, just watching the pathway. Lots of little like hiccups and bumps in that trigger. Hard to find your little Mexican in there, if you know what I'm talking about. So it feels very spongy. And what I mean by spongy, I mean she's kind of crazy. This girl's kind of nuts. You put your finger on it, this is all really undefined wall territory, although I found a wall. I press through it. There's this little sponge, 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 sponge. And then it feels like, did you hear that click? Even though you didn't see a real movement in the trigger, I feel like I have to almost force it back. Now, I will say I've not made any adjustments. I'm sure I can make adjustments. I'm sure that you all have made adjustments and you all have liked it a lot and you found what works really, really well for this. But even though the trigger is lighter, it still is a little unpredictable. She's just a little crazy, okay, guys? She's just a little crazy, but once you figure out her crazy, you'll do well with her. So let's go on. The use of aftermarket springs in any configuration may render this trigger inoperable or unsafe and void the warranty. Got it, got it. It does come with an additional safety plunger here. I don't know, where's it at? Well, it's in there. And this trigger is big and fat, but it breaks very quickly. Okay, so, oh my gosh, it's just, there's, I guess, the wall, and it breaks. Very light reset. Something I can tell you I don't like immediately is I've got these things right here, these grooves right here that border the trigger, and when I place my finger on the trigger, it feels like I'm grabbing a hollow trigger, if that makes any sense. It feels like I don't have any surface contact except with this point, the side here, and the other side. But it's very clean and it's great. But something that's happening is that when I go to rack it, it's odd. It's sticking. The slide it's not going back into battery. There's some. It just feels like something in the trigger is causing it to not want to seat properly. It's not because the gun's not lubed or oiled or anything like that. It's something to do with the trigger. Now, it's not had any performance issues in 250 rounds. I've just noticed that out of the trigger. The trigger is very light, but we're gonna see what it looks like at 25 yards or 20 yards. Here we go. So light trigger, it's probably the lightest one that we have. It's got a race ghost connector in it, but primarily what it looks like is, like we saw, put your finger on it, there's just a big fat wall there. She's fat, she's a big girl, guys. And you press, 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 and then it goes off. So you may like a lot of that crazy. It's not what I prefer because I don't know when the gun is gonna go off, so to speak. So I like, it's easy because the pressure is consistent. It's not like like some triggers, but it's this consistent, easy pressure, which is nice, which is something that I do like about it. So which trigger made me shoot faster? Well, I gotta be honest, there was no real trigger that helped me shoot any faster. I've got this problem. I've got this problem of 1/6, 1/7 splits, and it's got nothing to do with the trigger. It's all about how I press the trigger and the lack of quickness my finger can move. It's just, I'm just not that good of a shooter yet. I'm not a Shane Coley or a BJ Baldwin. You can blaze on those triggers. You know, I'm just not that type of person. So all in all, I can't really say that there's a trigger that made me shoot faster. I could just say what I liked feeling and what did it feel like. Okay, guys. A lot of you all may be wondering why we only have 6 triggers. I've tested 14, but why do we only have 6? Well, primarily the reason why we only have 6 is that the others failed in some way, shape, or form to meet what I would consider just standard Glock safety issues. And what that means is that each of these triggers did one of two things. They either, the trigger bar bird head was meeting with the plunger and was already coming in contact with a plunger safety without even having the trigger be depressed. And that's a big issue for me. So I think that that's something that just kind of wrote off 4 of the triggers at least right off the bat. And then I had cruciform engagement issues where we had plunger safety, or we had the striker cruciform engagement to the back of the cruciform here. That little area right there where the plunger meets the back of the cruciform, this is supposed to be covered by the cruciform. Some 75 to 100% is what Glock recommends from the factory. And a lot of these companies had really nice triggers, but they would either be covering up half of that, or they become covering up less, or right either at 75% or lower. And so that's why they didn't make it on. Now, I will tell you that some of the companies, well, actually all the companies that I had the issues with that I paid for, which were only 3 of the triggers, gave me my money back. So I do appreciate that. They were willing to give me another trigger, but I just said, no, thank you. Just didn't make it into the review. And I hope that nobody gets offended at those things. You guys know who you are, and I'm not going to sling mud or tell anybody anything different. So all in all, let me tell you that I really enjoyed undertaking this review. I did not enjoy how many Glock triggers failed, right? That was probably the scariest thing about this entire experiment. I did not think that they would fail in this way. It was something that was kind of terrifying for me, because I know a lot of people who have these different types of triggers in their guns and everything like that, and they're probably not smart enough or haven't even thought of it to themselves to actually test these things or have them to a gunsmith. Now, with that said, Glock tolerances are really interesting in that you could have one trigger from one company perform really well, and another trigger in a different, or the same company, just not do what it's supposed to do, or there be some kind of mishaps there of the safety issues. So I will say that it doesn't matter if I've given my seal of approval on these 6 triggers. You need to make sure that you're testing each and every trigger. This is why I like the stock triggers with the stock striker springs and the stock connectors and everything like that. I just like the trigger bars, because I know that I'm getting a lot of that reliability that Glock already has while just taking out a trigger bar. Are these triggers worth the money? Well, you're going to have to answer that question primarily on your own, but I loved all of the trigger bars. The only thing I didn't like about all of these was the actual SSVI, and there's nothing against the trigger. My preference with how the trigger felt on my finger was not something that I particularly enjoyed. I did not like that at all. These 2, I love those. They were great. With the whole trigger assemblies that I was sent, I really like both the Johnny Custom and the tactical trigger. These were both great, and both of these companies have great literature when it comes to making sure that your pistol is installed safely, or triggers installed safely into your pistol, as well as great YouTube content as well. Deus Meccanica has a lot of great YouTube content as well to ensure that you understand a little bit more about drop safeties and the actual 3 safeties, internal safeties of a Glock. The Arsenal Democracy switch trigger was my least favorite, and the only reason is because of these grooves. When I put my finger upon the trigger, I don't like these little borders. I just don't think it feels very nice when I press my finger upon it. But other than that, the trigger was very light, and it shot very well. We're obviously able to be accurate with it. It's just a preference issue. So essentially what I want to make sure that people understand is that if you are going to install a drop-in trigger, please do a couple of things for me. First, take it to a certified gunsmith. But if you're so cheap to where you don't want to take it to a gunsmith and make sure you've installed the trigger properly, or have them make sure you've installed the trigger properly, just see if it's drop safe. And one of the ways that we can see if it's drop safe is to see if this is the actual drop safe part of this ledge right here. Engage your trigger, take a tool, and press the back of the cruciform. If it doesn't fall off the ledge, you're fine. It's pretty simple. If it doesn't fall off the ledge, you're fine. But some of the triggers that didn't make it in this review, I would press them and they would just fall right off of that, ensuring that it wasn't drop safe. So if you drop your pistol, it could possibly go off. I want to let you know that triggers are a lot like women. They're all different, they're all crazy, right? We're all crazy. But does our crazy fit together? Does my mind and this trigger, do I like this? So it's all preference. Just like you like the color blue and I like the color green or black or gray, doesn't necessarily mean that that's wrong, or that doesn't necessarily aid the shooter in applying the fundamentals. What it means is that there are certain triggers out there that help me apply the fundamentals, and there are certain triggers that I find that help students apply the fundamentals better than other triggers. But essentially, learn thy trigger, learn and make sure it works for you, and you will be well. I promise you, absolutely promise you. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. Please comment below about your experiences with each of these triggers, and I'll make sure in the description to include each of the websites of these triggers. Thank you so much, and have a blessed day.